So Judges chapter 15. If you look at question number 1 on your handout, it says, as parents, whether you're past or present, did you or do you have certain expectations as to what your children would be like? Anybody have any expectations for their children? Any parents? Yeah? Okay. I'm not the only one. Good. So we have in our minds whenever we have children, right? We have this picture of what they'll do, who they'll be, things like that. The second part of that question is, did those expectations change with experience? How many people's expectations changed to their children? Okay, so how did they change? That's the third part of the question. For good? Okay. Anyone else? Nobody wants to discuss it? Okay, yeah. Never say my kids will never do that, right? That's great advice. Right? I think it's just natural probably as humans to have, and as parents, in the beginning at least, to have unrealistic expectations of our children. I think that's especially true with your first child. Would everybody agree with that? I think by the time you get to number 3 or 4, your bar is not too high. But usually, I think as parents, we expect too much out of our own children. I think as time goes by, hopefully, we become more realistic in what we expect of them, and probably realize that in the beginning, what we expected of them was set the bar a little bit too high. I say that because as Samson, what do you think his parents expected from him? Do you think they had high expectations for Samson? Well, he was the only child. We know that, right? So that in and of itself would have been against him. What were some of the other things that would have made him have high expectations?
Angel from God came.
Yeah. How many children have been born into this world where an angel of God announces their birth? And very few, right? Anything else you can think of?
I think they expected him to be holy, to be like, I don't know, I just imagine if I had a child where an angel came and said, "You're going to birthday, and he's going to be part of God's plan." Somehow I'm afraid I would have this expectation that even as they grow up, they would just exude righteousness. Like, well, you're God's chosen, so you're going to get it right.
Yeah. I think that would probably be a proper evaluation of his parents' expectations. I hope we have some time at the end, because I'm going to talk about the last question there a little bit more as we go. But kind of keep that in the back of your mind, and hopefully we'll get quick enough tonight that we can talk a little bit more about that at the end, kind of bring it home a little bit. So in chapter 15, beginning in verse 1, it says, after a while, in the time of wheat harvest, it happened that Samson visited his wife with a young goat. And he said, "Let me go in to my wife into her room." But her father would not permit him to go in. Her father said, "I really thought that you had thoroughly hated her. Therefore I gave her to your companion. Is not her younger sister better than she? Please take her instead." So question number 2 on our handout is, what happens when Samson goes to visit his wife?
Is she not there?
No, I think she's there, right? Because he wants to go in and see her, right? Her father wouldn't allow it, though. Why is that? Yeah, because as far as his father was concerned, she wasn't his wife, right? And why would he feel that? Why would he think that? All right, we read about the exchange between the parents, right, last week. We read about the great feast that Samson throws here, the 7-day feast, where people celebrated the marriage. So why would he think that she's not his wife?
She cried and carried on the whole week if they were there.
Okay. She was miserable the entire week, right?
I mean, I think when you go back to he called her a heifer, literally, and I'm not trying to be funny, he literally did. And it says there at the end of 14 where, or no, I'm sorry, that in 14:19 it says, his anger was kindled and he went to his father's house. So I assume the wedding feast turns into a catastrophe. He goes and kills 30 people and hands off the clothes, says, you know what, I'm done. I'm going home.
Yeah.
So while he's wrong to have done it, Dad's thinking, well, the wedding's over.
Yeah, so the question really becomes, why didn't Samson leave with his wife from the end of that celebration? Like David pointed out there back in chapter 14, verse 19, he goes back to his parents' house for some time and evidently just lives there. Never goes back and talks to the father, never goes back and talks to the woman or anything like that. And so his father just, he stormed out. He was angry as he could be, like David pointed out. He stormed out, and her father just kind of assumed, well, this ain't happening, But after Samson cools off for a little while, he decides, well, I'm going to go back now and I'm going to get my wife. And he goes back to figure out that, well, she's been given to another man. Now, there's a couple of things I think to point out. First of all, in this day and age, there was the idea, the principle of a dowry. You paid for your wife. So there was a price that had been paid for this woman. If you go back to chapter 14, and you look in verse 5, it says there, Samson goes down to Timnah with his father and mother. Well, his father and mother go on down and have that discussion with the parents of this woman while Samson is left behind. Remember, he's out messing around in the vineyard where he shouldn't be. But then in verse 7, you read there in chapter 14, he went down and talked with a woman, and she pleased Samson well. And so verse 8, after some time, the price was agreed upon. It would have been exchanged, and after some time he comes back to get his wife. So understand from Samson's viewpoint, this woman belongs to him, right? The dowry has been paid, the wedding feast was thrown. The only thing that didn't happen is they never consummated the marriage. And that was kind of the last act we would say in their society to view that marriage as being final. And so he comes back to figure out that his wife has been given to one of these 30 companions, or it might very well be, as some translations translated, his best man. So kind of, that's, you read these stories in the Bible sometimes, and a lot of times when I read them, that's just what they are. They're stories. But try to imagine yourself in that situation. I mean, try to imagine, here's this woman, you've arranged this marriage, and you've gone through all this stuff, and you show up to figure out that she's now been given to your best man. She's marrying him instead. So, Samson wasn't very happy, to put it mildly. Question number 3, what deal did Samson's father-in-law try to make with him? Yeah. So, what does he say about her sister too? Anybody catch that when you're reading it? Yeah, Kyle picked up on it. She's better, right? So she's younger, and evidently she must have been more beautiful than this woman that Samson initially wanted to marry. Was Samson satisfied with that? I mean, most people from a worldly standpoint, that would have been okay with them, wouldn't it? If you give me somebody younger and more beautiful, I'm okay with that. But Samson says, no, not gonna work for me. So think about it from Samson's standpoint. Think about it from her father's standpoint, and just thinking about her father. Do you put any blame on her father for how he handled that? Okay. All right, yeah. To give her to the best man would seem a little bit drastic, wouldn't it? But parents arranged marriages in those days, in that day and age. That was really the person he wanted her to marry, then that's who she was going to marry. Who do you think's at fault in all of this? Maybe we should just ask that basic question.
Probably Samson.
I think everybody's a little bit at fault here, don't you?
Yeah.
I mean, you got Samson, who obviously he didn't help anything the way he acted and reacted, and going away and not talking to anybody or trying to sort it out before he he ever came back. That was foolish in and of itself. You have her father, who obviously knows the dowry has been paid. She rightfully belongs to Samson, but he goes ahead and, probably feels sorry for her and says, hey, we've got a 7-day feast that went on, something needs to happen. And so gives her to be married to another man. How about his wife? Would you blame her for anything? Yeah, she was the one who told the riddle, right, to these guys, which initially set Samson off. So I think when you look at it, there's blame to go all around, isn't there? I think everybody was at fault to some degree in this particular story. So if you go on and read, we're not going to have time, I don't think, to read a lot of this chapter. It's a really short chapter. I was thinking we would have time, but hopefully you've read it beforehand. But question number 4 is, why does Samson believe he has a right to get even with the Philistines? All right, who's he blaming all this? Does he blame himself?
Well, the Philistines are the ones that said, told his wife, we're going to come kill you and burn you up if you don't tell us the rest.
Okay.
Yeah, there's the blame there.
Yeah, so Samson, basically when you look at it from Samson's viewpoint, he's putting all the blame on these guys who messed with his wife and figured out the riddle. And basically he's thinking in his mind, if they've never done this, none of this would have ever happened. Right?
The first go around, he kind of took responsibility because he says, this time I will be blameless.
Yeah, and that's...
And the first time, yeah, he took a little responsibility there.
Yeah, well...
The second time around,
yeah, and I think the implication there in verse 3 is, well, he says, if I harm him. The first time he killed 30 guys, right? Do you think he felt a little bit of responsibility for that? Kind of seems like he did, didn't he? But this time he's saying, none of this is on me. This all has to do with the Philistines and what they did, and so they're going to get what's coming. Let's see here. So basically, if I were to look at the people involved objectively, then I would say that everybody was to blame in this particular event. You could pass a little bit of blame around to everybody. But how did Samson view it?
It was all their fault.
It was all their fault, right? And so that's where he's going to focus all of his efforts and all of his energy. So question number 5, what does Samson do to the Philistines to get revenge?
Tied those foxtails together.
Yeah, how many foxes did he capture?
That's 300. He must have been a tracker.
Yeah, or else he had some help, yeah. Yeah, 300 foxes, and he takes their tails, ties those tails together, probably with a rope, and what does he put in between their tails? A torch, right? And he turns them loose. Where does he turn them loose? Yeah, in the fields, right? Probably in the wheat fields. We read back in verse 1. It's the time of the wheat harvest. So he probably initially turns them loose in the wheat, which is dried up at this point. Of course, immediately it catches everything on fire everywhere they go. That fire spreads over vineyards, and what was the other one?
Mine says corn, vineyards, and olives.
Okay, yeah, corn, vineyards, and olives. So, was this a tremendous blow to the Philistine economy? Absolutely. I mean, Samson was hitting them where it hurts, right? He was trying to do damage to them. He was trying to inflict punishment upon them, and of course it worked. It caught their attention, didn't it? So let's see here. Let's do number 6. I'm trying to work all these in a way. Hopefully it'll make sense. Maybe we'll have time to read some of it in between. Well, let's do this. What's the human reaction, or the first reaction when somebody does something to you? Yeah, I think that's just kind of the first human reaction and thought that goes through your mind, right? Somebody says something bad to you, you want to say something bad right back to them, right? It's hard to control yourself sometimes. But that's kind of the initial reaction is to get revenge on somebody or to retaliate. And so, is revenge permitted by God?
Is it? Yes.
Okay, got a guy who says yes. Anybody disagree with that? Anybody afraid to disagree with that? No? Okay. Is there a type of revenge that's forbidden by God? Let's ask it that way.
I guess it's revenge with malice.
Okay? I labeled it as personal revenge. In other words, if somebody does something to me, do I have the right to just go out personally, just go out and take justice into my own hands and do what's ever fit? Do I have that right as an individual?
The law that lived in was eye for eye, tooth for tooth.
Okay?
There was some of that, yes, they had to, if somebody wronged you, and they had actually, you didn't make it up, they actually wronged you, you had the right under their law.
Yeah, so there were certain instances in the law of Moses, and you could label it as personal revenge, but it really was God's law, wasn't it? I mean, this is how justice was supposed to be carried out in this situation according to God. It involved, a lot of the times, it involved the person who was wrong doing something to the other person didn't. Now, not all situations were like that. Sometimes you were supposed to go before a legal system and judges were to decide before that person could take matters into their own hands. But certainly it was a little bit different time than we live under today. But today, do we have that right? Do we have the right for personal vengeance? What's God's acceptable avenue for vengeance?
Forgiveness.
Okay, forgiveness is the better way, isn't it?
Isn't it just the appointed powers of the government?
Yeah, today it's through the legal system, isn't it? Our legal system. So as an individual today, somebody chops my finger off, I don't have a right to pull out my knife and cut their finger off, right? I have to go through the legal process in order to see that due justice is done. There was a legal process back then, but the point I'm trying to make is it's a little bit different than our legal process today. But I think the Bible also teaches the idea that trying to get vengeance can utterly consume a person too, can it? Would you say that Samson's at this point? Yeah, I think he's at the point where he's just controlled by vengeance. He'll do anything and everything in order to try to get back at these people. And in fact, if you go back down in chapter 15, down to verse 11, kind of jump a little bit ahead in the story here. This is where the Israelites come to arrest Samson, but they ask him, "Why'd you do these things?" To the Philistines. And he says this as the last part of verse 11. He says, "As they did to me, so I have done to them." In other words, revenge, right? I was getting even. I was getting back. And that's kind of the motive behind everything that Samson is doing throughout this story here. Okay, so we also read about another attack within that chapter in verses 6 and 7. And what do the Philistines do in retaliation for what Samson did to them, the burning of their fields? Yeah, so here you go, right? You're talking about vengeance, the never-ending cycle. You got to get everybody back for the last thing that they did. So Samson gets even by burning down all their crops, and now they say, we've got to get even with Samson, right? We can't just sit around here and let him do whatever he wants to do, or not do nothing, or not do anything about it. Their concept was, did they think that they did anything wrong? Is there any indication that they thought they'd been in the wrong? No, there's nothing that indicates they ever acknowledged any wrongdoing on their part, right? So they weren't concerned about what had gone on beforehand. They were just going to make sure that Samson got repaid for what he had done to them. And so they go to his father-in-law's house, to his, I guess, former wife or supposed wife's house, and they kill them. They burn them all with fire. And so Samson decides, well, I got to get even, right? Got to get back at him again. And what does he do? Yeah, he attacked him hip and thigh. That's there's a lot of debate as to what that means. I think what it's talking about there, if you study a little bit, take a little bit of time to look at the original language, but it's studying about some kind of action that came from his legs. And so I imagine Samson slaughtered them, killed them with his legs somehow. He may have kicked them to death or something like that. I don't know. But he had a way of improvising, didn't he? Yes, sir.
How would you describe Samson? How would you say, what, is he like a superhero or what?
He's like Punisher, I think, isn't he? Yeah. Yeah, well, maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the end. But that's a good question. Kind of hold that on to that. We'll skip over some of this reading and we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end, because I think that's a good idea to think about, concept to think about Samson as a person. You know, how do we view it? So anyway, he slaughters a bunch of the Philistines, something to do with the hips or the thighs. And then finally, what do the Philistines decide they're going to do? Yeah, I don't know. Is the number they're given? I think the Israelites, were they the ones who sent the 3,000, or did I misread it? Anyway, they sent an army, right? They sent an army. The Philistines sent an army to do what? Yeah, they're going to attack the Israelites, right? They were going to attack Judah. So the question that I have is this: why didn't they just attack Samson? You think they'd learn their lesson? They said, we gotta get a hold of this guy, but we ain't gonna do it face to face, right? There's no way. And so basically, if you can't hurt somebody, which is kind of the position that Samson was in, what do you do to get back at him? Hurt the people around him, right? That's why they killed his father-in-law. That's why they killed his supposed wife. That's why they're going to attack his nation, his brothers and sisters here. And so they come to arrest Samson, but what's the reaction of the Israelites? They came to Samson's defense, right? No, they want to turn him in, don't they? Why do you think they wanted to turn him in? Why do you think they were so quick to turn on Samson? Yeah. You know, you think about it, should they have rallied behind Samson? I mean, this was their enemy, right? We read about them being oppressed. Does anybody remember how long they've been oppressed here?
Was it 20 years?
I think it was 40, wasn't it? Yeah, it's the longest one that we read about in the book of Judges. So 40 years they've been oppressed by this nation. If there was ever a time to fight, I mean, if you had a guy that you could get behind like Samson, where you're looking at him, you're saying nobody can hurt him, they can't defeat him, don't you think it would have been now? So why didn't they? Go ahead.
I'm curious, because, we talk about they've been oppressed. However, clearly, Samson's family's doing pretty well. They're clearly wealthy. It says oppressed, but it doesn't really say whether that is they're ruled by these people, they're subservient to them, and that's the gist of it, or if it's they're mistreated and Philistine pulls, rides up in your yard, just walks in, takes your food, does what he wants, and you have no way to do anything about it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think they wanted to turn him in because they were like, this isn't that bad. We're, we have food, we have shelter, they're not beating us. They really want to beat him, and we don't want them to beat us.
Yeah, and I think that's probably more of the reasoning behind it. This is the same group of people who thought it wasn't too bad in Egypt too when Moses brought them out after, right?
Yeah,
They had a little bit of a warped sense, I think. But yeah, any of these other oppressions that you read about, it's total domination. And when they come to Samson there, what is it, verse 11? That's what they point out. Don't you know that the Philistines rule over us? There were consequences for not doing whatever they told you to do. And so they were afraid, undoubtedly. So what do they decide they're going to do? Yeah, basically Samson goes willing, doesn't he? He didn't want to see anybody hurt. I mean, he didn't want to see his brothers and sisters killed in some unnecessary fight. And so Samson says, as long as you guys promise me that you're not going to kill me yourselves, he says, I'll go with you. I'll let you bind me and I'll let you take me up to the Philistine army. So that's what they do. They bind him. They take him to the Philistine army. Question number 8, what happens when he's turned over to the Philistine army? Let me ask you this before we answer that. What do you think both Israel and Samson thought was going to happen to him? Is that unrealistic? I think they both knew that these guys were going to kill him. So to know that was his fate and to be willing to turn him over, kind of question their loyalties a little bit, don't you? Why do you think Samson went? This dude is not afraid of anything or anyone. I mean, he's reckless, isn't he?
I don't think he wanted to kill his own people.
No, he didn't. He didn't want to see that happen in any way, did he? Yeah. So he had respect for their life, not so much for the Philistines, but respect for their life. So what happens when they turn him over?
He has a flashback.
The Spirit of the Lord comes upon him.
Yeah, the Spirit of God rushes upon him. The Bible says he rips those ropes off like they were, a candle, thread to a candle, the flame of a candle. And picks up a jawbone, looks around, finds a jawbone of a donkey, and picks it up. And with that, he killed 1,000 Philistines. I guess they finally decided they're going to stop trying to arrest him. But initially, think about the situation. And it'd be kind of interesting to me. I wish, we read these stories, but I wish we had more details about it. Because I wonder how quickly he was able to kill that many people to where they said, okay, I think we need to back off now, But they eventually decided, we're not going to arrest this guy, and they leave, but not before 1,000 of them are already laying dead. Okay, so that's kind of chapter 20 here, and let's talk about some of these discussion questions. We've got a little bit of time here. So what do you think Samson's marriage and all these acts of vengeance accomplished? All right, we studied last week about how his marriage was a violation of God's law. He says, I don't care, this is the woman I want to marry, you go get her for me. Right? Are his acts of vengeance at least questionable? I think so, yeah.
It's like a lot of this is just like he's trying to pick a fight with these people. Was he did he do this just to pick a fight with them?
Well, it goes back to go back to chapter 14 there and look at verse 4. And this is talking about his marriage here. His mother and his father, they object to it. But it says his mother and father did not know that it was of the Lord, that he was seeking an occasion to move against the Philistines. And it says, for at that time the Philistines had dominion over Israel. So, you have this principle, all these events that are happening, it's creating tension between Samson and the Philistines, isn't it? Maybe between Israel and the Philistines. And God knew that from the beginning, didn't he? That's why he chose Samson. He chose him because he knew that the things that he would do would create tension between him and the enemy, and he would eventually get back to the enemy. He would carry out the vengeance and the justice of God upon the enemy. And so that's part of the reason why God chose him. He was using him as a vessel to execute judgment upon this nation that was oppressing Israel. So then question number 10, what do Samson's actions reveal about his character? Steve kind of asked the question, how do you assess Samson?
He's nuts. Spoiled little boy. He's a man of action.
Yeah, he is a man of action. He was also a man of words, though. That's pretty interesting. He had riddles, and even when he kills all this 1,000 Philistines with a jawbone, he has this wordy saying that he comes up with. In the original, wish we had some more time to talk about, but in the original, it's kind of interesting, almost a rhyme, almost like a nursery rhyme after he kills 1,000 of these people with the jawbone of a donkey. He was wild, right? Would you agree with that? I think he was unpredictable, and he's a confusing guy because, I mean, there's times when you read about him, you just think, what in the world is this guy thinking? You know, like going to that vineyard and eating the honey out of the dead lion's carcass. You know, things, marrying this woman that the law of God clearly forbids. You know, and you look at him and I think, well, this guy's out of control. You know, but there's other times when you read about him, like at the end of this chapter here, you know, he's a really humble individual. After he kills all these people, who does he give the credit to? Yeah, he prays to the Lord and he says, you've given me this victory. You know, it's not like he was this arrogant guy walking around. He understood his power came from God. He acknowledged that. He relied upon God. He asked for him to provide him with something to drink. And so it's kind of I don't know how you assess him. You know, at times he's out of control. And then there's other times when you look at him and he's acknowledging God, and he's trusting upon him and relying upon him. But I think the point is, God was using him to get done what he wanted done. And that was the purpose of Samson in God's plan. God knew what Samson would do and how people would react and how things would unfold. And that's why he chose Samson.
This probably is wrong, but I just see Samson as that good old boy who has bad impulse control. It's not that he's fundamentally a bad guy. Like, you know, his people come, he's like, as long as you're not the one killing me, I'll know. You know, he may have went overboard, but he was right to be mad that they gave away his wife. Maybe shouldn't have, you know, burned down all their crops. But he just strikes me as that good old boy with a temper control issue.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
In today's world, I think you'd be called a narcissistic and probably psychopath or sociopath because he has no conscience.
Yeah, it's amazing. So the last question there, just think about this. You know, we started talking about how as parents we have this expectations of our children. But the question is, how do you think God's plan for Samson differed from his parents' expectations? You know, when this angel comes to him and says, this guy's going to be a judge and a deliverer of Israel, I mean, what do you think they're expecting from this? And then you look at the life of Samson, it wasn't probably what they expected to get from him, right? A lot of good lessons, though, in studying Samson. Anybody have any thoughts or comments or anything before we end tonight?
Well, one thing on that, you know, the previous judges, they mounted armies, they got troops and led the conquerors, and they've been down for 40 years and they were totally whip pups. They weren't going to fight anything.
Yeah.
So he did the job. And that's just all that's it. Sometimes you do the job, and it's not the way people think.
Yeah, and that's kind of interesting because a lot of these judges, you know, their battle cry is rally the troops. You know, get ready. Samson's like, you guys step back and do your thing. I got this. You know.
It's not anything, so I guess I'll have to.
Yeah, exactly. But that's why God chose him. He was a man of action, like you said. So.